I've always wanted to know, what was India like back in the 5th century BC or 150 BC or the 6th century AD? What was life like back then? We know a lot about kings and mighty warriors, but what was India and its cities and its everyday people like? Well, lucky for us, we have some sources that tell us about the land of India in the 4th century BC for this video, but two are particularly interesting: the Greek sources, like the writings of Megasthenes and Nearchus, and Buddhist sources. So let's dive into these sources and see what happened then. Alexander, the warrior and leader from Macedonia, crosses the Hindu Kush by 326 BC and reaches the Indus River. Here are two kingdoms, one led by Porus and the other by Ambi. He asks both of them to surrender. Ambi of Takshila surrenders, but Porus resists, and in the consequent battle, Alexander wins. He now wants to march on and take the rest of India, but the army of the great Alexander, which has crushed everyone and everything to dust on its way from Macedonia to Persia to Central Asia, now is scared to move into the Indian heartland because they have heard rumors of the war elephants of the Nanda Empire. Alexander retreated. Wise decision. Indian war elephants were death machines. War elephants in ancient India were one of the 4 essential parts of an army. They could trample a number of foot soldiers and scare away horses, destroying enemy formation within seconds. Before he retreated, Alexander set up the city Alexandria on the Indus, which had Greek settlers in it. He was succeeded by Seleucus when he died 2 years later. By 320 BC, in the heart of India, a man rose out of nowhere and established the mighty Mauryan Empire, Chandragupta. Around 303 BC, Chandragupta made an alliance with the Indo Greek king Seleucus. In exchange for 500 war elephants, Seleucus gave him control over the Indus region and his daughter. The Greeks in the Indus were now part of the Mauryan Empire. The Indian word for Greeks was Yavanas. At this time, Buddhism was a dominant religion in India, and the Mauryas were patrons of Buddhist monks, actively sending missionaries around to get conversions. This policy was followed by Chandragupta's son Ashoka. In fact, some of his pillars at Sachi are in Greek. But around 100 years after Ashoka's death, around 155 BC, the Mauryan Empire is quite weak and ruled by Pushyamitra, who will be its last king. And Menander I is the king of the Indo Greeks. Indians called him Milinda. Menander I was born in Afghanistan, and his capital was in modern-day Sialkot, Pakistan. From Hindu Kush to West Punjab was his Indo-Greek kingdom. Being born in India, he understood the culture, the philosophy, the way of life, and lived in the Indo-Greek hybrid way. Buddhist sources in the Milinda Panha tell that Milinda once questions a Kashmiri Buddhist monk, Nagasena, on life and death and all of that high stuff. And impressed by Nagasena's wisdom, Milinda converted to Buddhism. Milinda Panha also tells us that Milinda was a great patron of Buddhism, whereas Pushyamitra was not. Some coins of the Indo-Greek period were actually bilingual in Greek and Pali. But by 10th century AD, the last Indo-Greek realm falls. And by 30 AD, all of the former Greek territories fall under the Kushan Empire. Kushan Empire's official administrative language was Greek until 127 AD. All of that's fine, but the point is, how was India like back then? The Greek accounts tell us that. Megasthenes was a Greek ambassador to Chandragupta's court. He wrote Indica, which tells us that, for example, India had a caste system. At the top are philosophers, he tells us, who are engaged for sacrifices and funerals and are believed to be dear to gods. At the start of every year, they predict floods and droughts. Then there are the husbandmen who till the ground. They're not required to fight or do public service. There is no privately owned land in India, Megasthenes writes. All of the land belongs to the king. Then there are herders. They live outside the villages and towns, in tents. Then there are artisans who make tools and weapons, and they don't have to pay taxes. Then there's the military class who fight wars. There are overseers who are government workers, and there are also councillors and assessors. They are in small number but very wise and respected people, Megasthenes tells us. Megasthenes tells us that no one is allowed to marry outside their caste or work outside it. There are special officers appointed to make sure no foreigner in the land is ill-treated. Farmers in India are considered sacred. Unlike the warriors in other countries, they do not ravage farms during war conquests. Moreover, the warring sides never destroy enemy land with fire or cut down its trees. Megasthenes also tells us there are a lot of elephants in India who are trained for war. They are stronger than Libyan elephants because of abundance of food on the Indian soil. India has pure air and the very finest water. And then we have Nearchus, one of Alexander the Great's admirals. When he came to India in the 4th century BC, he wrote about what he saw in India. He says everyone wears mostly cotton of a brighter white color than found anywhere else, which the darkness of the Indian complexion makes so much whiter. He says there are large fortified towns with thick mud walls on 3 sides, guarded with gates and watchtowers. Wide streets run through the town, which are busy with people and noises of the townsfolk, bullock carts and labourers. Nearchus also tells us of the parasols used as a screen for the heat and the shoes of white leather, whose soles are made of great thickness, to make the wearer seem so much taller. He also tells us the houses are made of mud and brick and well built. There are numerous large houses which have a central courtyard and sometimes an enclosed garden with lotus flowers, hibiscus shrubs and fragrant mango trees. Outside the towns are coronation tanks and several sacred enclosures and groves. Beyond the groves lie a number of villages dotting the emerald rice fields, and finally there is the thick forest spreading its way right up to the foothills of the Himalayas. Out of all the war and heroism stories, it is these tiny details thrown in that tell us about India back then.